Folks, October has arrived, and now we have a big NHL news dump to talk about with a big trade regarding the Edmonton Oilers, a big signing with the New Jersey Devils, and one of the last RFAs remaining, plus what that means for other young defensemen in the future. So make sure you guys watch till the end as we break down all the latest news here today, because there was a lot to talk about this morning, and make sure you hit that subscribe button for more news videos just like this as we cover all the latest throughout this NHL season, which, thank God, it is starting so soon. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is the announced trade between the Edmonton Oilers and the Utah Mammoth. And this was a deal that I had wanted to see for a while, and I think makes a lot of sense for both teams involved. As you can see, the Oilers announced they have acquired Connor Ingram from the Utah Mammoth in exchange for future considerations. Man, he gets around a lot, right? I just hope whatever airline he's using, he has a good rewards program because he's going to need it. The goaltender will report to the Condors in the AHL, and Utah is retaining $800K of his $1.95 million AAV, which is the big thing here. Previously, Connor Ingram last week was placed on waivers by Utah and was put into a position where anybody could claim him, and if he wouldn't be claimed, he would be sent down to the AHL. The thing is, I had a probably 50-50 chance in my head that Ingram would get claimed. It was just about the right team, the right fit. But at the end of the day, all these teams still are pretty cap strapped, and most of the teams that are looking for a goaltender still are going to need to get a bit more creative than that, especially in Ingram's case where he has a decent cap hit. It's easier said than done to actually bring him on. So even though I think a $1.95 million cap hit is pretty fair value for the potential upside you could get in Ingram, for a team like Edmonton specifically, that just wasn't really in the cards. You needed to have some salary retention here to make the dollars work, and they ended up making it happen here. So even though I was a bit disappointed to see him not claimed on waivers, he still gets dealt to a team that I think will be a pretty good place for him long term. And I do think if the Oilers can get it back to health, back to 100% level mentally and physically, you could get potentially even a better goaltender than Stuart Skinner, I'd say. Maybe not against Dallas in the Western Conference Finals, but outside of that, I think Ingram has some neat potential that just hasn't been able to come together quite yet. Ingram's always been somebody I've been rooting for with just how open he's been about his journey and his struggles in the past, but he's somebody that has had some good moments in the NHL, but again, stringing that year to year just hasn't been the case. But I would say still, the 2024 season he had with Arizona, where he got 50 games, a .907 save percentage, he looked absolutely terrific. And even the year before that, had a .907 save percentage in 27 games. So up until the move to Utah, he was looking pretty interesting. Now, it seems like there was a few players that from the move to Arizona to Utah just completely stagnated or actually dropped off in their play. You had Lawson Krause, you had Matthias Michelli, who later got traded to the Leafs, and now Connor Ingram, who struggled pretty handedly in his first year with the Utah, getting an .882 save percentage in 22 games, playing an AHL game as well down in Tucson, and it just didn't really feel like there was much of a fit for him long term with how much Vejmelka was able to really rebound and solidify himself as the starter. So even though some people might be laughing at, oh, the Oilers acquired a guy that has an .882 save percentage, it just was not a good situation for Ingram personally, and we can see when he is at his best, a .907 save percentage on the Arizona Coyotes is pretty good. They were getting slightly better during those last couple of seasons, but still not really all that respectable, and Ingram was really able to pull up some pretty good numbers. And hey, we look at the Edmonton Oilers, and they're trying to get as much as they can, squeeze everything they can out of the goaltending position, and I think Ingram could give them some interesting play. We'll see if he actually does end up becoming the starter, but I just think in terms of the pure potential there, he's a really good bet to make, and especially with that lower cap hit now, you can sink him down in the AHL, have him start there with the Condors to start the season, get his confidence back up, then potentially around Christmas or something, they bring him back up to the NHL club and see what happens. Especially since the Mammoth only got future considerations, there is zero risk with this trade. He only has 1 year left on his contract too, so if it doesn't work out, who cares? I just think for Edmonton, these are the type of low-risk, high-upside moves they should be making every single day of the week, that they haven't been doing necessarily the whole McDavid era, but these are the type of moves that, again, you take a little bit of a risk now, and it could benefit them in the future. I'm not going to say that it's going to completely revolutionize their team, because I think Ingram, even at his best, is only a decent upgrade over Skinner. But hey, a decent upgrade for easily the Oilers' most inconsistent issue is still a pretty sizable upgrade for an Oilers team that has always needed that. And just reminiscing over the 2024 season that Ingram had with Arizona, if we're just going off of pure goals saved above expected up here, the top stat, in terms of the goaltenders that are saving the most pucks, the most goals above expected across the league, Ingram was 13th best around everybody in 2024 with Arizona. And if the Oilers can even get close to that, if they can get just a top 20 goaltender in that range, that changes everything for them completely. The defense will still have its problems, sure, but if they can unlock 2024 Ingram, watch out. Overall, I just think this is a very, very solid win for the Edmonton Oilers. Again, we'll have to see how it pans out and if Ingram can actually turn that page. But at the end of the day, it's such a low-risk move, and they traded future considerations. Wow, I'm sure they'll be so devastated. Overall, I'm going to give this trade an A- for Edmonton. I think it'll work out pretty interestingly for them. For Utah, they get rid of the cap hit, which I think is fine. I'm going to give them a C+ there. But just in terms of the asset management, Ingram's stock has definitely taken a big hit over the last couple of seasons. So we'll see if he's able to turn that page, but I'm liking the chances that he will in Edmonton's system. Now let's move on to the biggest news story of the bunch here regarding Luke Hughes and the New Jersey Devils. And even though he wasn't the last RFA, Luke Evangelista somehow is still holding on. I don't understand what's going on over there. But Luke Hughes was the biggest one by far. We saw Mason McTavish sign his long-term extension. Really solid deal, I think, for both sides there. And this one, even though I don't think it's as good for both sides, we'll get into that in a second, still to get this deal done before the season starts is monumental for New Jersey. But still, as you can see from Pierre LeBrun, the Devils announced 7-year contract at $9 million AAV for Luke Hughes. Both sides had a breakthrough in trade talks last night. New Jersey gave a couple of new offers to Hughes camp on Monday. Neither were accepted, but another offer late Tuesday night did the trick. And it is fascinating because we've heard a lot about this contract with it being such a high profile one over the last couple weeks. It seemed like for New Jersey and Hughes, they were pretty consistent on the term, wanting around that 7-8 year contract, but the dollar amount, of course, was a massive hurdle. But New Jersey seems to have upped themselves quite a bit over the last few days, and $9 million does the trick. Now, I will say, this is another contract like the Kaprizov one, which I will touch on later on in the video, that will have a lot of sticker shock associated with it right out the gate. But kind of like Kaprizov, even though it does sting a little bit, it's still going to look, I think, pretty okay by those last couple of years. Luke Hughes' situation is a bit different since he's only 22 years old, so you hope to get a bit of a good progression curve as he gets the prime years under this contract, and I think with that, it'll look pretty solid. Nothing spectacular, I don't think an absolute steal at any point, but just a pretty good contract, I think, in that second half. Now, Hughes is a bit of a controversial player because sometimes the defensive side can be a bit of an issue, but I do think Hughes has really improved over the course of his first season in the NHL onto his sophomore season. Even though the point production wasn't quite there, the points per game were better, and I think the defensive play was vastly improved. It still, again, isn't anything that's going to wow you or anything, but he was a lot smarter with the way he was using his skating and actually using his strengths to his advantage. And I think for New Jersey, that is such a big progression because, quite frankly, I think they need him to really step up onto that defense as guys like Dougie Hamilton start to get into their twilight years. And he's a puck-moving defenseman that I still think has yet to even touch his potential. I think he's about halfway there, honestly. He can be a really good, especially point-producing defenseman, and we haven't quite seen that yet. I think that's what the contract mostly hinges on, but still, even outside of that point production, he's still a really good puck mover, really smart with his skating, and was somebody that I loved going back to his draft year. I had him ranked 4th in my rankings. He went 4th overall in New Jersey, and I think has been about as good as advertised. What I'm mostly happy for here is that him and McTavish haven't gone into the season completely blind, cold out of the blue, and having to deal with that because we've seen year after year all these RFAs that end up waiting out, that it just never works. Maybe it'll work for money, but especially in year one, there is just never a good season to come out of it. And maybe they'll end up rebounding in the future, but it's always a bit of a question mark, and it lingers on with that new contract, and I think creates more problems than it's worth. So even though I think Luke Hughes maybe even could have held out for more, I think $9 million is absolutely respectable for the player and caliber we're talking about here. Just a really solid defenseman who I think will eventually become a top pair guy. But what I find most fascinating about this contract is the new benchmark it sets for younger defensemen. And it's strange to think because there's a lot of defensemen that have signed around what Luke Hughes is making now. I mean, Cale Makar is making the same amount of money as Luke Hughes, which is weird. But for some of these younger defensemen coming up, guys that have already established themselves, Lane Hutson, I think this could be a really interesting benchmark that Luke Hughes has started here. Even though I like the kid quite a bit, Luke Hughes has had 2 pretty solid seasons, nothing spectacular or anything, and I still think there's a lot of potential to go off of. But even with that, he's still going to be getting $9 million on a long-term contract. And that's kind of the progression we've seen in contracts lately, especially younger players, is that more and more these guys are getting these big long-term contracts before they've really even hit the potential that they've hit. But for a lot of smart GMs, you're able to get value if it ends up working out. And that's what we're seeing in a lot of the best contracts today. I mean, Jack Hughes is a great example. His contract is looking unbelievably good because New Jersey bet on the high-end upside. So you're hoping to see the exact same story happen here, but for established defensemen like Luke Hughes' brother Quinn Hughes, this is fantastic news because, I mean, Quinn Hughes is already going to make unbelievable amounts of money, but I think you could ask well above 9 and easily get it on the open market. Like, genuinely, if Quinn Hughes has another Quinn Hughes like here and continues to be absolutely dominant, could he get 13 million, 14 million? I think the case could be made, especially if he were to leave Vancouver. But the main younger defenseman that I want to compare Luke Hughes to, not in terms of style, but in terms of what contracts could look like and how it opens up opportunities, let's talk about Lane Hutson and the Montreal Canadiens, because I've never talked about this player before, and I want to talk about him. Definitely never before talked about on this channel. So let's talk about him. Let's give him some attention here. If you don't know, I think Lane Hutson is a pretty good player. And after his Calder Trophy winning 66-point season, with Luke Hughes not even reaching the 50-point plateau yet and getting $9 million on a long-term contract, if Lane Hutson replicates what he did last season, or even gets better, what is he about to get on his next contract? Because Lane Hutson will be an RFA after this next NHL season. So you have a big contract coming up here for Montreal that they really need to focus on. But again, let's just say for argument's sake that Lane Hutson improves by a decent margin, gets 70 points this season somehow. What is he about to make on his first contract? Just like Luke Hughes is now about to be making $9 million. I think it's a very, very question because I think Hutson especially is in line to make a bunch of money that he really has proved himself to be worthy of. Now, I saw Habs Chronicle and a few other people say that this is great news for the Lane Hutson contract, and I don't know if I quite agree, mostly because I think the separation between Hughes and Hutson, especially for the case that Hutson could make, I think is pretty big. I don't think it's a gargantuan ravine between the two, but I think in terms of the point production, in terms of where they were at the respective points in their careers, I think Hutson is pretty clearly ahead. I mean, just comparing Luke Hughes and Lane Hutson's rookie seasons, I think there's a pretty sizable difference there. And let's even say for argument's sake that Lane Hutson has the exact same sophomore season that Luke Hughes did, where you had a few less games played, a couple less points, but a pretty decent change and improvement in the defensive play. I would say for that raises Hutson's stock even more because you know he has potential to play even more offensive and get even more point scoring, but now he's starting to improve the defensive play behind it, and that makes him, I think, a lot more valuable on the open market if that were to happen. So I would say having it be great news for the Hutson contract, I don't quite see that because I think Hutson is about to make so much money, and I don't think people are going to realize that until it happens. To me, as of right now, if Hutson continues to improve, has another stellar sophomore season, there is zero chance he's making less than $10 million. Genuinely zero. You have to throw that expectation out of the window because I think there's probably about a 2.5, maybe even $3 million difference between these two defensemen. Luke Hughes is a really good offensive defenseman, but Hutson is among the top 5 already in the NHL, at least if you just go off of last season, and that's a pretty big difference to me. So if Hutson were to end up with $11 million on a long-term contract, even $12 million, I'm going to say it, I'm not surprised. Now, the last story I want to talk about today is the Kirill Kaprizov mega contract that we saw. I wasn't able to talk about it in length in the full video, but I did want to give it its flowers here because Kaprizov will now be paid as the highest paid player in the NHL. And I'm glad to see we're finally starting to see some NHL players break beyond that $15 million barrier because I quite frankly think they deserve it at the high-end level. But Minnesota had barely any leverage here, and they said as much throughout this entire process. We saw a few weeks ago, apparently Kaprizov rejected an 8-year contract at $126 million combined. Well, now we see Kaprizov accept an offer at 8 years and $136 million combined. So this is another one that we were talking about, just like the Luke Hughes one, where I think a lot of people will have the sticker shock over it. And I will say $17 million is a hard thing to swallow. I think a lot more than the Luke Hughes thing, because Kaprizov's 28 years old. The prime is here. It's not going to be paying for the last few seasons of the deal where that's going to be looking really, really good. That's the part of the contract that might not be as good as you maybe want. But I mean, Kaprizov's going to age pretty fine. Going to be about the same range as in Artemi Panarin, where he's still scoring, maybe not at the level that you'd want consistently, but still is one of the better offensive producers, even if he might be a little bit more one-dimensional in the second half of his career. But at the end of the day, there wasn't really many options here. Minnesota was never going to win a Kaprizov trade. They were never going to win him leaving into free agency. They needed to keep him, and they did. Even if it was a very strong amount of money, Minnesota had no choice, in my opinion. Kaprizov, of course, knew that, rejected a massive amount of money, and took some more money on top of it. And I think, honestly, good for him. Minnesota is Kaprizov. That is what this team is to its biggest core. And to not have him would have been devastating. To have him now for the next 8 years is vital. But those are my thoughts on all the latest news that we've seen over the last few days. A lot of stuff before the season starts that was a lot of fun to talk about. So thank you guys for tuning in. If you enjoyed, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and the notification bell. Comment down below your thoughts on all these trades and signings and everything, and what you think it means for the future. And a big shout out to all the current members here on the channel. Their names will be on the screen. If you guys want to be a part of exclusive polls, if you guys want to get shout out in videos just like this, plus custom emoji to use in the chat and the streams, it's just a couple dollars a month, and you can hit the join button next to the subscribe button, or hit the link in the description down below, and it helps the channel out a ton. And thank you to all the members here, and shout outs to each and every single one of them. But I'll see you guys in the next one. Have a fantastic hockey day, and